Security is always a critical aspect, and having to build security from ground zero is a challenging task, and there is always a risk that something might go wrong. To solve all of these problems, there are many identity solution providers, and Azure Active Directory B2C is the identity access management solution from Microsoft, which is capable of supporting millions of users and billions of authentication per day. My name is Brugain and welcome to .NET Mastery. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you are always notified of the free videos that I upload. In this short video, we will start from ground zero with Azure Active Directory B2C, create a B2C tenant, and then register applications on that tenant and authenticate our .NET MVC application using Azure Active Directory B2C. With that, we will implement sign in, sign up, edit profile, and sign out functionality. This video is a subset of the complete course where I dive deeper in Azure Active Directory and explore some of the advanced concept of adding custom object authenticating API and much more. Now, even though this is a subset of the full course, we will cover many critical aspects in this short video, like how we can consume Azure Active Directory B2C to authenticate a .NET application, and how we will redirect from .NET application to Azure Active Directory for authentication or registration, and once that is complete, how do we navigate back to our .NET application, and much more. And I hope you are excited to learn the basic functionalities of Azure Active Directory in an hour. Let me get started with all of that from the next video. Let me walk you through a typical situation without Azure Active Directory B2C. You will have users of your application, and let's say you have a web application. Now, if a user wants to access that web application, there might be some pages that requires authentication. Now, a user can use their email, or sometimes they can even use social logins like Gmail or Facebook to create an account in your application. When a user submits a request, if you have local identity, that means you are storing user ID and passwords in your database. So in that case, you will store them in your database, and then you will return back the data if their login is successful, or if they have registered successfully, and if they sign in, you will check your database. If the user ID and password is valid, then you will grant access to your application. Now let's say you are in the same company and your company has multiple applications for the same client. So let's say there is a web application down here and there is an API as well, and same users have access to both of them, or maybe there could be 5 or more applications for the same user. But all of them are sharing different database and it is maintained by different team. In that case, the users will have to register for the API as well, or if it's a different application, they will have to register in their database as well. And now the issue is maintaining all of those identity in all different database. On top of that, each team is responsible for handling security of their application, because now you are storing passwords in your database and they are critical information. You have to protect them. So all the overhead for protecting passwords, encrypting them, making sure the hash key for password is stored somewhere and it is safe from intruders. In order to solve all of these problems here, or basically remove the security aspect of application out from the developer's domain to a third-party application, now we have something called as Azure Active Directory B2C. The benefit of this is registration, login, reset password, and storing of those critical passwords will be done inside Azure Active Directory B2C. So when a user goes to application to sign up, the application will redirect them to Azure AD B2C, and there we will display a page to sign up for an account, or if they already have an account, then they can sign in. Once the registration or sign-in is successful, then Azure Active Directory B2C will return a token back to the user. Now when we are trying to access anything, we have to pass that token, and that token basically tells the application or API that hey, I have been authenticated by Azure Active Directory B2C, and this is the proof of that. If that token has been toggled or altered, the application or API will reject that token. But if the token is valid, then API knows that authentication is already done and this is a valid user and these are all the roles. Sometimes users might have different role and they might have different access based on that. All of that will be stored in the token that signifies who that user is, and based on that access will be granted in the application or API. As an example, when they go to access the web application, they will again pass the token. If that token is not present, then they will not be able to access the secured resources. So that way we will not be storing any passwords for the user in local database. All of that will be handled in Azure Active Directory B2C, including the pages for registration, login, reset password, and those identity critical pages. That is a brief overview on how Active Directory fits into existing architecture of application. Let me walk you through the advantages of Azure AD B2C. As we noticed in the last video, Azure AD B2C reduces the burden of security on developers. Because now the security component is offloaded to Active Directory B2C, and that will handle everything related to securing the passwords, storing them, granting access tokens, and everything else. And because of that, developers do not have to store user passwords in the database. That way a main component of hashing them, making them secure, goes away as well. Then B2C can act as a central store for security which can be shared across multiple applications or APIs. That way you will have one store that will be responsible for security even if you have multiple applications that are accessing using the same secured users that are there in your Active Directory B2C. And then using Azure Active Directory B2C, you can easily add support for single sign-on using multiple social media platforms that are supported, and you can enable MFA support. That is pretty straightforward. So all of this functionality comes built in Azure Active Directory B2C. Because of that, you will save a lot of time and overhead if you had to configure all of this from scratch in your application. All the code base for this particular course is hosted on .NETmastery.com. If you navigate to courses there, you will have to scroll down to Azure Active Directory, and if you click on the details here, and if you navigate to the GitHub code, you will notice two snippets. The old snippets that you see here is for 2021 course, and that will be archived soon. But what you should go for is the new course Azure AD B2C 2025 update. Once you click there, it will take you to GitHub repository, and there you will see each and every commit and what is updated in which section and what is the name of that video. If you navigate to the section here, you can always compare here and see what was different and what was added in that video, and based on that you can easily identify if you missed something. So make sure to use the GitHub repository for debugging, but do not try to clone and directly run this because there are some configuration that you will have to update, which we will go through as we progress with the course. First thing that we will need is an Azure account. If you do not have an account, make sure to go to portal.azure.com and sign up for a free Azure account. And once you sign up here, it says welcome to Azure, and I do not have a subscription. If you are signing up for the first time, you will get $200 of free credit and 12 months of popular free services. I already have an Azure account, so for me a free trial will not work. Even if I try that route, it will know the billing address. It will know my billing address and it will finally say that you already have redeemed the free trial and it will not work. But I need to create a subscription. You can select subscription here or you can search for that here, subscription. I will create a new subscription. So once you are here, we will select the add button here and I will go with pay as you go. If you do not have an Azure account, you can feel free to select the free trial. I will select pay as you go here and I will have to populate my billing details. Let me do that real quick. I will enter my credit card details here and I do not want any technical support. Let me sign up here. Perfect, it is confirming the details. Let me select my email. And great. We are on the getting started guide here, but if I click on Microsoft Azure, we are on the home page for portal.azure.com. And now let me go to subscription. I have that here, or I can search for that. Subscription, and we have an active Azure subscription. We will require an active Azure subscription in order to get started with the course. So make sure that in subscription you have one and the status should be active. We have an active Azure subscription. What we want to work on is creating a B2C tenant. Now B2C tenant is like a directory that will have multiple files or resources within that particular tenant. How do we create that? In the search here, you can search for B2C and there you can see there is B2C tenants. If you click on B2C tenants here, you will notice nothing happens. Here it will basically display a list of all the active tenants, but there is no create button. How do you create a B2C tenant? Once you create that, it will be displayed right here. In order to create that, you will search for B2C and then you will go to Marketplace. In the all here, you also have that in Marketplace, but that is the option that we are looking for. We need to create an Azure Active Directory B2C. If I select that, then it will open a new page where we have an option to create a new Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. Once you select that, we have few options that we need to configure. First thing that we have to do is give an organization name. This can be anything and it is not related to any of the links that we will be doing later on. So you can call it anything that you want. Let me call that .NET Mastery Coding. It is a random name here, but that looks good. Then we have initial domain name and this is critical. As you can see, it is appended with .onmicrosoft.com. That means it must be unique. If I try .NET Mastery, it will not work because I have already taken that in some other video. So rather than that, let me call that .NET Mastery Coding here. And perfect, that is available. That's why you can see the final domain name will be .NET Mastery Coding .onmicrosoft.com. Now this name cannot be modified later on once you create a tenant. It is fixed and you cannot edit that. Even if you want it later on, you will have to delete this tenant and create a new one with a different domain name. And that is the only way you can update domain name after a tenant is created. You basically will have to delete and recreate a new tenant. Then we have a resource group here, which acts as a container to group all of the services related to one item together. Let me call that B2C directory and create that. I cannot add a space there. Let me replace that with hyphen and that works. The location here, I will keep that as East US, but you can keep it whichever is closest to you. Same thing applies for location here as well. Now if I select location of United States, that does not mean that it will not be available in any other country. It will be available, but this is the geographic location where it will reside. If most of your clients are in some other country, you should select that location. This looks good here. Let me do review and create, and then we will create our tenant. Now tenant creation will take a couple of minutes, so let me wait for that and I will come back once that is done. And perfect, the tenant creation was successful. Here it is asking you to click here to navigate to your new tenant. Now I know it is tempting to click here, but do not do that. I will show you exactly on how you can switch directory and go to that particular tenant that has been created. One thing that you should notice here is initial domain name. That is exactly what we saw, .NET Mastery Coding .onmicrosoft.com. It is linked to Azure subscription and that looks good. Perfect, our tenant creation is successful, but do not click on the navigation here. Let me go back to portal.azure.com. Now if you go to B2C tenants here, you will see the new tenant that has been created and that looks good. But how do you switch to this particular tenant? In order to do that, let me go back here and let me search for B2C here. We have Azure Active Directory B2C. If I navigate there, you can see Azure Active Directory B2C, but here it does not have an option to create Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. The reason is we already have created that tenant and you can navigate there by clicking this particular gear icon. If you click there, the default one is directories and subscription. Here you only see default directory. I believe I will have to log out and log in. Let me try refreshing and well, refresh worked. I just did Ctrl F5 for a hard refresh and now I can see the new directory .NET Mastery Coding and that is the directory that we created for Azure AD B2C. You can see the domain name here, that is correct, .NET Mastery Coding. Let me click the switch button. Now when you switch directory, if you had any app services in the default directory, they will not be available when you have the current Active Directory as the B2C tenant. You will navigate to this particular directory when you are working with B2C. If you go to home page here, and now let me search for B2C. If you click on Azure AD B2C, you see we're preparing your B2C directory. When we were on the default one, it did not have all of this option. It just had a link on how to create a B2C directory. But after we switched to the directory that we created or the tenant that we created, now we have way more options and we will go through them as we progress with the course. Before I progress ahead with the course, I want to spend some time on switching directory. Let me go back to the gear icon and switch to the default directory that I have here. And let me create few resources. Let me create a function app here, create that, and we will go to consumption. Test here, region East US, .NET, well, fake app 1, perfect. Let me create a new resource group here. I will call this fake, perfect. Storage account, we will create a new fake storage account as well. And we will select next here. Alright. And I will create a fake app. Now the reason I am creating this is I want to show you that when we switch directory, things are not available and it's a completely new directory where all the files or all the app services and everything will not be shown in that directory. Let me wait for the deployment. This video, I do not want you guys to follow along and create a resource. I am only going to do that to make you more comfortable with the directories. And perfect, that is complete here. If I go to the home page, if I go to function app, we have a fake function app here, and that looks good. We have these resource. Now if you go back and switch directory here to the B2C tenant here, you will notice that if you go to function app, perfect, the switch is done here. Now if I go to function app in this particular directory, I do not see that. So that is the difference. This directory will only be responsible for Azure AD B2C, and there you will have multiple details on app registration and everything that we will cover in the upcoming videos. But if you are working, you need to understand that if you are looking for some app resources that were there on the default directory, you will have to go back here and switch to that directory to access those resources. We will be working on the B2C domain that we created here, and that will be our directory for this course. So again, make yourself comfortable with the concept of directory, switching directory, and how to go to old resources if you ever have to navigate between directories. Before we continue with our Azure AD B2C instance, let me open Visual Studio here and create a new project. It will be an MVC application where we will consume Active Directory B2C. Let me create that here. Project name, I will call that Azure B2C Web, but the solution name will be Azure B2C. Let me create that. We will use .NET 9 here. Authentication will be none, and we will use the default option. Let me hit the create button, and perfect. Our project is up and running. Now rather than running using HTTPS here, I will use IIS Express. That way it will load the web application or the web browser, and that looks good. Perfect, we have the URL that is being used by IIS Express, and we will require this URL in the next video when we register an application. The application has been created here. Now let me navigate back to Azure portal, and we will go to home page. We are in the B2C directory here. If I navigate to Azure AD B2C, perfect. Now if we go to app registration, I do not have any application right now. Well, if you go to all application, you will see a B2C extension app that you do not modify. It is created by default. Here we will click on new registration, and again before you do anything, make sure you are in the B2C tenant here, that is .NET Mastery Coding, and not your default directory. So there we go to B2C, you can see your domain name. We will go to app registration, new registration. When we create an application in our B2C tenant here, we are basically saying that an application will be using the Azure Active Directory, and then we will say what is URL of the application, what is scope of the user that will be using that application, and so on. As an example, the web application that we are building here, we want to use Active Directory to authenticate users in our application. For that, we will have to register an application. If I go back here, I am calling it Azure B2C. I will give it a name of Azure Sample App. Now this can be modified later on. The important thing here is the supported account type. As we scroll down or as we navigate down here, the scope increases. This is the narrowest scope here, where we are saying account in the same organizational directory will be using this application. That means if any other organization has an Active Directory and that user wants to use our application, they will not be able to use if we select the first option. In the second option here, it says account in any organizational directory. That means any email inside an organizational directory can access that. But if you select this option, then personal user like a Gmail account, Hotmail or Yahoo, will not be able to use it. For that, the widest scope is account in any identity provider. That includes Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo or any other identity provider, or even any organizational directory will be able to authenticate, sign up or create an account in our application. So we will go with the widest scope here, that is accounts in any identity provider. After that, we have something critical, that is redirect URI. Now the application that we built, the sample application, it is already running here and we have the URL. This is required. If I go back here, I will paste that, and after that we have to append signin-OIDC, that stands for OpenID Connect. This URL is very critical. We also have to select a platform, it's a web application, let me do that. Now in the URL, make sure that it ends in sign-in OpenID Connect, and it should exactly be like this. If there is any mistake there or if something is wrong here, things will not work and you might be scratching your head many times on what is going on. So it is critical to add your domain name, then /signin-OIDC. That should be the redirect URI when you are using Azure AD B2C and registering your application. With that in place here, the permission, we will grant admin consent to OpenID and offline access permission, and with that, we will register our application. Now right now we are registering an application. Once that is complete, perfect, you can see it displays some of the endpoint and also some secrets for your application. We will come back here and we will explore all of this. But right now our application has been registered. If we navigate back here, let me go to Home, AD B2C, App Registration, and in All Application, perfect. Now we have the new application that we have created. The application that we have created here, let me navigate to that application and let me walk you through few settings. Right here in the essential, you can see we have the client ID, we have object ID. These are the IDs that we will require later on, but then we have client credential. Right now we do not have any client credential, but when we want to add a certificate for authentication, we will be creating client secret. Let me navigate back to the overview, and then we have redirect URI. Right now we have one web application with redirect URI, and we can explore that in the manage settings as well. This is just an overview or the essential details of everything that we have configured for this app registration. If we go to branding here, we can of course change name, we can add a logo, add some more URLs like terms of service, privacy statement, and also we can update domain name. If you have verified domain name in your application, you can select that from the drop down, or you can verify a new domain. That way you do not have to use this particular domain. You can have your own custom domain name that you want to use for your application. Next we have authentication here, where we have the redirect URI. Right now we only have one redirect URI, but let's say if you have a different environment for development or a different URL for development servers, production server, then you can have different or multiple redirect URI. That way you can use the same app registration or the B2C application for different instance of your application. Once you scroll down, we have implicit grant and hybrid flows. Now this is specific details for some of the use cases, but by default what you can do is you can enable both of them. That way we can retrieve the access token, using which we can authenticate a user, or even ID tokens which are used in the ASP.NET Core web application that use hybrid authentication. You can read more about that here, but we will enable both of them. With that configured here, let me save the changes. And the next thing is certificates and secret. Let me wait for that. And perfect. When we will be using B2C for authentication, we will be creating a client secret and we will use that in our application. When the time comes, I will explain you how to create that and how we will use that client secret. We also have API permission here. If we want to expose our API, we can add a permission. After that, if we want, we can expose an API endpoint here and we can add scopes for that. Based on different scope, you can do different things in the B2C tenant. Next, we have the owners here. If you want to add some co-owners to the application or the app registration, you can always add that. Finally, we have the manifest for application on whatever we have configured so far. Everything is available in the manifest. Now, we typically won't be using all of the details here. The main thing here is authentication that we will be using quite a lot, and certificates. Sometimes if you are working with API, you will work with API permission or expose an API. But I wanted to give you a brief overview. That way you'll have a basic idea about the app registration that you have created. And one thing here is the endpoints. These are the different endpoints that are exposed by the app registration, and I will even use some of them as we progress with the course. Now that we have our app registration or our app in place in Azure, we want to set up something called as a user flow. User flow, you can think of that as when you are interacting, you have a login screen, you have a registration screen. That is what we will set up in the user flow. Let me navigate there. That will be at the Azure AD B2C level, and it is not dependent on the app that you have registered. So at the Azure AD B2C, if you expand policies here, we have user flow. Let me click on the user flow, and then you also see something called as Identity Experience Framework. Identity Experience Framework is more of an in-depth or very advanced thing as compared to user flow. And user flow, when I say it is not advanced, it does not mean it is not capable of handling production scenario. For most of the use cases, user flows are great, and that is what you will be using in application. We will focus on user flow here, and I will explain you how you can customize that as well to add more properties if required. We do not have any user flows here. We will create a new user flow, and there are few options that you can select. The first one here is sign in and sign up. Then if someone wants to edit a profile or reset their password, you can even set up different user flow for sign in and sign up, but I like to set both of them together. Once you select that, we have the version here. If you know that you will require legacy version for some reason, only then I will use the old version, or else I will just go with the recommended version and hit the create button. We need to provide a name here. Let me call that SUSI. That stands for the same version, sign up and sign in. Now the name that you give here cannot be modified later on, so be careful with what you want. It will basically be B2C _1_ and then whatever you type here. I would recommend you to use SUSI. That stands for sign up and sign in. That way you can easily tell by the name on what it signifies. After that, we have the identity providers. We have local account, so we will have the email sign up. After that, you can have the multi-factor authentication, and then you can set that to be off, always on, or conditional. Now if you use SMS or phone call, even though this is free, but for SMS there is a separate charge and you should be aware of that pricing. Let me show that here. If I search for Azure B2C pricing, let's navigate there. Perfect pricing table here. You can see for the first 50,000 it is 0, but then if you have SMS phone authentication, it has its own separate charge, and that is per verification attempt. So make sure when you make a selection here, you are aware about the charge that might encounter if you enroll into SMS or phone authentication. We also have Authenticator app if you would like to use that, but I will use email and I will switch that off for now. I do not want that. With that in place, if we scroll down, we have enforced conditional access policies. We do not want that. And then we have user attributes and token claims. Now here it is saying that what are the attributes you want to collect from a user when they are registering or signing up. We can ask for given name, we can ask for surname, email address is not required because when they will be signing up, they will already have that. Let me select more here. And perfect, you can see there are many other settings. In the return here, we can return the user object ID if we want to store that in our local database. We can return that. But I believe this looks good for now. Let me select OK. And I will hit create, and let's create our first user flow. Perfect, that is done. With that in place, if you click here, we have more settings and we can modify everything right here. We have created our user flow. If we go back to Azure AD B2C in the policy, we have the SUSI here. If I click there, we have properties, identity providers, user attributes, application claim, and few more settings. In the properties here, we have few settings that we configured when we were creating things, and we also have token lifetime, token compatibility, session behavior, and few other settings. If you want to modify your multi-factor authentication, you can do that here, but I will leave it as it is for now. Next, we have identity provider. Right now, we only have email logins that are enabled here, but you can manage identity provider and you can use any one of these identity providers to basically enable single sign-on if you want to do that. We will do that later on, but I do not want that right now. Let me navigate back to the user flow here, and next we have user attributes. I selected given name and surname, and that is what is enabled, but if you want display name, country, city or something else, you can capture that as well. These attributes will be collected during sign-up process. All of the selected claim values will be returned to your application in the token when the registration or authentication is successful. After that, in the customize here, we can customize the layout of how your login screen will look like, and we have few more settings. In the local account sign up page, we have 3 attributes. We can change their order as well. On the top here, you can see there is a button, Run User Flow. Once you select that, it will mimic on what a login screen will look like. Let me show that. You can see sign in here, we have email and password, and the sign up screen, we have new password, confirm password, given name, and then surname. If you want to change the order here, that is easy. Go back here, and you will have to select local account sign up. Only then user attributes will come up here. And let's say you want surname before given name, you can move it up or move down. So these are the settings that you can play with, and you can even change it from a text box to something else like a radio button, drop down, or a checkbox. You can customize all of those settings here, but this looks good. You can even do a custom page content where you can give a custom URI, but that is way advanced and you will have to configure the application to have a completely different screen. Then that is the option that you should use. But our default settings here are looking great for sign in and sign up. Next, we will create new user flow in the next video. Now we want to create a next user flow that is for profile editing. We will go with the recommended version. Let me create that, and I will call that edit, all lowercase. Identity providers will be email. The MFA, we will set that to be false here. What are the attributes? I will use given name and surname, and I believe that looks good. Let me create. Perfect. If we click on edit here, we will have similar option to update few things here. Let me go with the default user flow and let's examine that. Now in order to see edit in action, we will have to sign in, but we have not created an account. Let me close that and let me go to the sign up user flow, run that, and let me run the user flow, sign up here. I will send a verification code. Let me copy this and I will paste that here. Perfect. I will add first name, last name, and let me create that. Now when I hit the create button, you will see a page not found. And perfect, you can see it is going to localhost 44380 because that is what we have configured. If we go to app registration, and if we go to app here in the authentication, that is the redirect URI. So once everything is successful, it will try to redirect back here. Now we are saying once everything is successful, that means that user must be registered here. Let me go to users and perfect. You can see that user is registered here. That means registration was successful. But after that, when it tried to redirect, it went to the local host and that did not work. But our sign up was successful. If I go back to the user flow, let me try the edit here and see if that works. If I enter an invalid password here, we will see the error message. Let me type the correct one and perfect. Once I type the correct one, it takes me to the user detail where I can modify the details. If I click continue here, it will again take me to the local host because that is the reply URL. Perfect. So everything for those two flows looks good. Let me create the final one to reset password. I will call that reset here. Email looks good. Given name and surname. And let me create that. Perfect. With that, we have created 3 user flows for our application. Now we want to consume the app that we registered here and the user flows in our application. Let me go back to the application that we have. I will stop it here. And we have to add a couple of NuGet packages. Right here, we will search for Microsoft.identity.web in the browser. We will install that. And we need another NuGet package that is web.ui. Perfect. It enables UI for web app that uses Microsoft.identity.web. That looks good. Let me install that. Perfect. With that, we have the NuGet packages that are needed. Let me save everything. And perfect. That looks good. Next, we need to set up our application to use the app that we registered here. And for that, we will require few things in the application. Let me go there. We need the client ID and we will configure few more settings. Let me navigate back to the application and we will open program.cs. Rather than hard coding everything here, I will open app settings here and let me create a new section that will be for Azure B2C and we will store every details here. My GitHub Copilot is already suggesting me on what I need and that is somewhat right, but I will leave that empty for now and later on we will populate that. We need instance, we need client ID, we need domain, and then we want policies that we created for sign up, reset, and edit profile policy ID. Also have a callback path. Of course, I will keep everything empty. I want to walk you through on all of that. Now that is all the settings that we will use for now, so that looks good. We need to populate the details for all of them. Now here make sure that the name that you are using exactly matches like what I am using here, because that way it automatically configures the NuGet package that we added for identity, on what is the name for policy for sign up, sign in, reset password, or edit profile. So it must also match on what we have in the UI. Let me do that. But before anything, we will copy the client ID here and we will paste that here. Looks good. Now if we go to endpoints here, you can see we have a B2C login here. I will copy this and I will paste that for the instance name. So that is .NET Mastery coding. If I go back here in the overview, you can see .NET Mastery coding, but rather than on Microsoft, that will be b2clogin.com. That will be the instance name. We also have the domain name here. That is exactly what we have here. Let me copy that, paste it here, and then we need the policy name. Let me go to user flow, and we need to copy the exact names here. B2C edit, that is for edit profile. Go back, B2C1 reset, and the final one is Susie. Copy that. Perfect. The callback path here, if you go back here in the app registration, we have authentication. That will always be sign in OpenID Connect. Paste that. Now with that we have all of the settings in app settings.json, but we have not passed that on to the authentication. Let me do that in the next video. We have all the configuration that is needed in app settings.json, but how can we tell .NET to use this configuration, and that we have to use Azure AD B2C tenant to configure authentication and authorization in this application. We will do that configuration in program.cs, and where we are adding all the services here, we will say builder.services. We will add authentication. When we add authentication, we will have to do some configuration and provide some option. First one is OpenID Connect defaults, and there is a default for authentication scheme of OpenID Connect. We will use that here, and you can notice here this authentication scheme is nothing but it has a value of OpenID Connect. We will set that as the authentication scheme, and on that we will have to add a method add Microsoft Identity Web App. And inside there we need to pass the section that we configured in app settings.json. Because this particular Microsoft Identity app, it is the NuGet package that we added and it requires all of the settings. Because we added those settings in Azure B2C, we can pass that using builder.configuration.get section, and this name must match what you have right here. Let me copy and paste that. If the name is different here, then it will not be able to retrieve all the settings from app settings.json and pass that to the Microsoft Identity Web App. Once we pass all of those settings, it will automatically do all the configuration because it knows you are using B2C tenant and it has the basic details that are needed to connect to that domain and also what are the policy name. That way it can redirect to that policy. Now how will it redirect? Let me go back to portal.azure.com here and let me log in. We are in the correct directory here. I will go to B2C. We will go to policy, user flow. When we go on edit here and run user flow, if you notice here and if you notice all the sections that we have, we are already passing the .NET Mastery B2C login, that is instance, and then we have the domain name as the parameter, that is .NET Mastery coding.onmicrosoft.com. That also we are passing right here. After that everything is hard-coded here, v2, well-known OpenID Connect configuration. The final thing that will be dynamic will be policy name, and that we are passing right here. So based on all the settings that we have, it will automatically be able to call that URL, but we need to call specific endpoints, only then it will invoke all the endpoints. Before we work on that here, if you scroll down where we are configuring the pipeline, Before we have use authorization, we will have to say app.use authentication. You need to be careful here that authentication must happen before authorization. But with that, our configuration for program.cs is looking perfect. Now we need to add an endpoint in our application. When a user clicks there, it should take you to sign in using the configuration that we have done in our services. If I run the application here, it will run the application using the settings that we have, but we do not have a login page. Let me run the application here, and what I want to do is on top with the nav bar, I want to add a register and login button. Let me create a partial view for that here. So in views, shared, I will create one more view, and it will be an empty view. Let me call that underscore login partial. You can of course call it anything you want here. Let me add that. Here I will be using system.security.principal because I want to make sure that if a user is authenticated, then I want to display a logout, else I want to display sign in or sign up. I will have a UL here, give it a class of nav here, and within there we will add an if condition. I will have the user object because I added system.security.principal. So user.identity, if that is not null, I want to check if that is authenticated or not. If that is authenticated, then I will display logout button, else I will display login. My Copilot is suggesting me some things here. Let me tap that and I will modify that. I have an error here and let me add a check here of true. Perfect, that goes away. Else here does not have a closing bracket. Perfect. I'm not sure why I'm getting this blue lines here. Let me close and open again. And much better. Now my Copilot has already added an area. This is incorrect. Let me remove that. The controller name will be account and action will be sign in and sign out. That is correct. These are the default action and endpoints that are needed to invoke the Azure AD B2C endpoints or user flows that we have. These are pre-configured by the .NET team, so you do not have to worry about that. But one thing, the ASP area here must be Microsoft Identity. If you are typing all of this, you might not have GitHub Copilot, or it is possible even if you have Copilot, it might give you a different recommendation. Let me type it here, identity, and perfect. So the anchor tag will go to ASP area of Microsoft Identity, controller will be account, and action will be sign out, and then we have sign in if the user is not authenticated. Let me work on styling here rather than UL. Let me cut this and I will add a UL inside if condition. The closing UL here will also go. Perfect, looks good. Then rather than navbar nav, let me add a few more classes here, navbar nav, and navbar right. The li element here, let me make that navbar text here, and perfect. That looks good. Now if a user is logged in, along with sign out, I also want to display a link to edit profile. Let me paste that because we have that policy. The action name that .NET team has used is edit profile, so make sure to use it exactly like that. Right here we can call it anything we want. Let me call that edit profile, and I believe that is everything that was needed. If something does not work, we will come back and fix that, but this looks good. We need to invoke this login partial in underscore layout here. So after the UL here, let me add partial, name is equal to underscore login partial. Perfect. With that, and it will not be param, it will be partial. With that in place, let me continue from the next video. We are using our login partial here, and we have configured the add authentication in program.cs. With that, if we run the application, things will not work exactly as you expect. And let me show that. You can see we have a sign in button because user is not authenticated right now. But if I click there, you will notice we go to not found. It is going to Microsoft Identity, but it does not find an area of Microsoft Identity. I did tell you that it is automatically configured by default, but for that we have to add one more item. In program.cs, where we have add controllers with view, we will have to append there add Microsoft Identity UI, and that will map everything as expected. So whatever areas that we have added here or the action, they will be routed only if you add this particular line, then it will route to Azure AD B2C tenant. With that, let me run the application and see if that works. We go to privacy here, we go to sign in here, and perfect. It takes us to a sign in page. We can sign up here, but if you remember, I already created an account. Let me go back here and I will try to sign in there. Let me click on the sign in button and let's see what happens. Perfect. It automatically redirects us back to the application, and now you can see for some reason we do not see sign in. Now we have edit profile and sign out. If you examine the logic that we added in our code, where we were checking if user.identity is authenticated is true, then we will display this. So for some reason when we log in on B2C tenant, it automatically redirected us back to the application, and on top of that it also populated the user.identity. If you do not see this particular page and if you see error, most probable reason is if we go back to our portal here, let me go to B2C tenant, app registration, go to the application here, and in the authentication, the redirect URI might be incorrect. So make sure that the URL that you have here exactly matches on what you have in your browser, the localhost path, and on top of that, it should have signin-OIDC. If there is any mistake here, things will not work as expected. But with that, we have basic functionality of sign-in working. If I click on edit profile, you can see it takes me back to user detail here, and we can update it to, let's say, Bruggen1 and continue. And if I click again here, that is updated. If I click cancel, it redirects me back. So login and edit profile are working as expected. Let me click the sign out here, and when you click on sign out, you will see something weird. It is kind of stuck inside an infinite loop here, and it is not able to redirect back. Let me see what is going on with this in the next video. Now if I go to sign in here, that is working as expected, but we have an issue when a user tries to sign out. When we try to sign out here, the application is stuck in an infinite loop and it cannot redirect to the sign out page. The reason behind that is once you add Azure AD B2C and you are using that for authentication, you need to add support for Razor pages in your application. Right now we only have controllers here, so we will have to add builder.services.add Razor pages here, and then in the pipeline here we will say app. Well, let me do that here, app.map Razor pages, and then we can also add with static assets. With Razor pages configured in program.cs, now if you run the application, it will not be stuck in infinite loop when you sign out. Let me show that. Perfect. Now if I click on sign out here, great. You can see sign out has been successful and it redirects to Microsoft account and signed out. That was the path that we configured in login partial if you notice here. But in order to navigate and do all the functionality, we require the Razor pages mapping in program.cs. In the current implementation here, once we sign in, let me do that here. And then if I sign out, it takes me to this Microsoft Identity account sign out, and it has this UI. But I do not want that. Rather than that, I want it to redirect to home page and directly display sign in. Now customizing this Microsoft account sign out is possible, but for that you will have to add areas in your application, convert the existing controllers to areas, and then you can customize, which is a lengthy route. An easier approach is to directly redirect to the home page when we call the sign out. So for that, what we can do is when we add authentication, we can add custom event handling for when we have sign out. Let me show you how we can do that. We will do that in the Add Microsoft Identity web here. We will configure option. Option goes to, and then here first we need to bind things. Let me cut this here, and we will say builder.configuration.bind. We want to bind the section Azure B2C, and we want to bind that on our option. Perfect. Once we bind that, then we want option.events, and we want to modify the on sign out callback redirect. So once the sign out is successful, what do we want? Right here we can say context. We will say context here, use the arrow function, and then we can say context.response.redirect. We want to redirect to the landing page, that is /. We will say context.handleResponse, and we will return task.completed. With that event, it will redirect us back to the home page. So perfect, I believe that looks good. Let me run the application and see the result. Let me sign in here. And now if we sign out, you will notice we do not see that page. Let me click here in 1, 2, 3, and perfect. It signed me out and we are back on sign in. One more thing that I want to show here is when we go to sign in, you can see the UI here is different as compared to when I go to, let me log in here. I go on edit, you will see the template is different. This one looks better, and by default this is the template, but I think for some reason it got modified. We will modify that in user flow. I do not think I have walked you through this one. So we want to modify the SUSI template here, and there when you go to page layout, you can see there is template in the corner. When you see unified sign up here, you can see classic is selected by default, but what I want is ocean blue. With that update here, let me wait for that, and it might take a couple of minutes to kick in here. Let me close the application and let me try again. There are 3 templates that are available by default, and it has not been updated. Sometimes it can take up to 5 minutes. But basically we have 3 templates. We have ocean blue, we have slate gray, and we have classic. Now because it takes a while to update here, even if you run the template, you will notice it will run in classic. That is not what we selected. We selected ocean blue. Let me wait for that. Let me refresh here to make sure that it is aligned. And ocean blue. Let me wait for 5 minutes. And perfect. You can see it has been updated. This looks much better than what we had before, and that looks good. So with that, you can see we have multiple templates that you can select for user flows, and each one of them will be able to toggle that even if you go to edit. Well, not this one. Reset password, you can see in page layout. The default is ocean blue, but you can modify that if you want, and you can customize that. With that, everything that we have so far is looking great.